is everybody today? Everybody doing good? You can do a thumbs up if you're doing good, or you can actually talk if you're doing good. It doesn't matter to me how you're doing today. So, folks, we're really excited that you guys all made it on today. We've got lots of folks jumping on. We've got folks viewing on Facebook as well. And this is also recorded, and I don't know if everyone knows this, but we started this past week editing these calls and putting them on YouTube. So you can see the last 3 calls, because those are the ones that we actually got to record on Facebook and edit it up. So we wanted to make sure that you guys knew that and that you can see that. If you want to go to the site, it's a very, very simple place to find. All you have to do is go to GenerationZVideos.com, and it will take you straight to our Facebook page. Very simple. GenerationZVideos.com, and it will go straight to our Facebook page. So I'm really excited about today. I'm really excited to get to talk to my friend Aaron Alejandro again. Hey, how are you doing today, Aaron?
Doing great, James. How are you?
I'm doing really, really well. Aaron and I have been friends for several years now. He is a great supporter of us at Generation Ziegler, and he did one of our very first calls that we did in this group, and we were really excited to have him. And Aaron has brought with us one of his good friends, and I'm going to give Aaron the opportunity to introduce his friend and tell us a little bit about him and introduce the congressman to our group. Aaron?
All right, very good. Thanks so much. James, I just want to commend you again for putting this together. And to all the students, again, congratulations for taking advantage of the opportunity. At the end of the day, you're giving yourself a competitive edge. You're expanding your professional network. I just can't say kudos enough. I've told you before, and I'll tell you again, I'm a little bit envious. I'm a little bit jealous because I would have been participating in this had it been available when I was your age. So I'm just proud of you for taking advantage of it, and I'm proud of James for setting it up. We all go through life where there's people that we look for, we look up to, and of course, anybody that knows me, I literally look up to everybody. But we go through life where we're trying to find those people that can help us hone our leadership skills. And growing up at Boys Ranch, I knew of somebody like that. He grew up at Boys Ranch like I did. He was an FFA. He went on to be state president. He went on to be a state senator and then a U.S. congressman. I had the pleasure of working with him briefly when he was in the Senate. I had a pleasure of being his director in the U.S. Congress. I tell people all the time, I know a lot of people. I've been in the presence of presidents, movie stars, musicians, artists, extraordinary business people, and I can tell you this, of all the people I know, and I know a lot, I only know one Duke. One. And y'all are about to meet the only Duke I know, and that is the Duke of Lithuania, the Grand Duke of Lithuania. So I'm not going to steal his thunder because I want y'all to hear firsthand his story. And that is the story of Bill Sarpalius, who went from homeless to the Grand Duke of the country of Lithuania. And along that path, you're going to find elements of faith. You're going to find elements of helping one another. And for some of you, you're going to find elements of FFA, stock show, and great educators. So with that, it's an honor, James, to introduce my very, very dear friend, Congressman Bill Sarpalius. So, Congressman, take it away.
I still find it difficult to tell my story because it is very faith-based. But when I was a young boy, I and a lot of kids my age at that time, polio was a big disease. And it crippled a lot of young people. And I happened to be one of those that got that disease of polio. So when I got it, I have 2 younger brothers. So my younger brother started school before me. So during my entire education, I was trying to play catch up with my younger brother and had hoped that one day we would be able to graduate together in high school. So because of being late in school, that made it difficult for me in trying to catch up, because at polio, I can remember laying in the hospital and these Catholic nuns massaging my arms and legs every day. My arms and legs shrunk to a point where I could take my fingers like that and run them up and down my arms and legs and never touch a skin. So a future for me at that time didn't look that bright, but I was in a hospital with a whole bunch of other kids just like me. When I got out of that hospital, my dad left my mother. He was in the Air Force. My mother was an alcoholic and couldn't keep a job. So we became homeless in Houston. And we would just move from vacant house to vacant house. We never attended the same school for an entire school year. That never happened until I went to Boys Ranch. So at the age of 13, the courts sent me and my 2 younger brothers to Boys Ranch. I was 13 years old in the 5th grade and couldn't read. But Boys Ranch had some good teachers. And I got interested in agriculture, got interested in, and it was very common at Boys Ranch at that time where owning livestock was your only bond towards responsibility, taking care of something that it gave you a sense of opportunity there to work with those animals and a sense of love that a lot of those kids didn't have. So being involved in the FFA was very popular at Boys Ranch. We had a huge FFA chapter. And of course, I greatly admired my vocational ag teacher. His name was Guy Finstead. He was the one who probably gave a lot of inspiration to me. In the FFA, you're required to recite the Ffa Creed in front of your class. And when it came my turn, I was so shy at Boys Ranch that I could not stand up and say my name. And when it came my turn, I could not do it. I just couldn't. I did not have any self-confidence in myself. And so my teacher took me into his office, closed the door. I recited it word for word, no problem at all. But if you put me in front of a bunch of students, I froze up. I just couldn't do it. Well, through the FFA program and the leadership programs that it has, being involved in parliamentary procedure and farm skills and the different things that the FFA provided, it kind of puts you in an environment where it gave you a chance to get out front and build the self-confidence in yourself. And I can't emphasize how important that is. You have to believe in yourself, and you have to believe in your goal and what you want to do with yourself. What do you want to accomplish for yourself that you think you would enjoy doing? Well, in my senior year, Cal Farley, who founded Boys Ranch, and his whole goal was to help kids that didn't have any place to go. His goal was to help the bottom 10%. And he was a wonderful man. He was an athlete, and he was a great salesman. He convinced people to help donate funds, and he expanded Boys Ranch, and he based it around agriculture and a good education, a good school system. And he was a true inspiration to all the boys that were there. He was the guy who gave us a second chance in life. On my senior year, I finally caught up with my brother, and we were going to graduate together. In my senior year, during FFA week at Boys Ranch, the FFA chapter conducts its services in church. And I was asked to give the sermon in church that Sunday, which was the first time I ever was going to get up and give a talk. And I'd written this sermon out and memorized it and practiced it. And it was titled, Being Prepared for Death. It talked about salvation. And that Sunday morning, Cal Farley, like every Sunday, he would stand at the steps of the Capitol, or at the steps of the chapel, and shake hands to every boy that entered the chapel. And he sent a boy to come get me, and I went up to him, and I was holding that piece of paper, and I was shaking, and he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, Bill, you're going to do just fine today. He said, look over the tops of all the boys' heads. Keep in mind, at that time, we had a little over 400 boys and about 200 staff. So it was a pretty good-sized chapel. And he said, look over the tops of every boy's head. Don't look at any boy in the eye, and you're going to do just fine. And save me a place in the dining hall for lunch, which that was a big deal. Well, just as those services started, Cal Farley went in and sat down in church, and he was writing on a piece of paper some notes, and he leaned forward and he died of a brain hemorrhage in the church. So I saw him take him out the back of the chapel, and I knew that he was gone. And I knew that I couldn't give that sermon that I had written. So I spoke from my heart and talked about how much he meant to each one of us. When we were hungry, he gave us food. When we had no clothes, he gave us clothes. He gave us a bed to sleep in. He gave us an opportunity. So leaving Boys Ranch a few months later, I was towards the bottom of my class. I knew that when I got off a bus in Amarillo, I wouldn't have any place to go. And that's the way it worked at Boys Ranch. Same thing to Aaron, Tom Maynard, any kid that goes to the school, Boys Ranch. When you get off the bus, you're done. You're on your own. So I got off a bus with one suitcase, $100 in my pocket that I got from selling a dairy heifer that I had at Boys Ranch. And walked down to where my mother was living. She was living in an apartment then, a little one-room apartment. And I convinced her that she needed help with her problem. So my thinking is, if we were to get out on the road and go up to an alcohol and drug treatment center, they would take her, just like Cal Farley took boys who had no support. So we hitchhiked through that summer across the Panhandle and on down towards Dallas, Fort Worth, Stevensville, several towns there that I'd heard had treatment facilities. But every one I went to, you had to have money. Texas ranked 50th nationwide on alcohol and drug treatment. We did not have a single place in the state of Texas to help an alcoholic as an adult or as a child. So she was eventually placed in a mental institution for alcoholism. And I can't tell you how painful that is. If you think of the only parent that you have, she's in a mental institution and she wants to get help for alcoholism, and she doesn't get it. So I went to college. I became a vocational ag teacher. I returned to Boys Ranch, was teaching vocational ag, was an ag teacher. And then I got a call on a Sunday morning where she had committed suicide. And, you know, I felt the struggles that she went through was extremely painful to her. First of all, to be a mother who has 3 boys that she loves very dearly, that she had to give up and send to a place 1,000 miles away. And then to watch her kids grow up there and not having the opportunity to be a real mother to her children. Well, that's when I decided to get into politics. I prayed and I prayed, and I wanted to know, what can I do to help address this problem of alcohol abuse? And keep in mind, at that time, if you had an alcoholic in your family, you kind of hid them. You didn't really let anybody know that you had somebody that was an alcoholic in your family. So I decided to run for the Texas Senate. And people thought I was crazy, but I had a dream. I believed in my dream. And I started my race with $25, 0 name ID, running in a district is extremely conservative. I was running as a Democrat in a Republican district. And the only reason I was running as a Democrat, because at that time, the Democrats were in control of the state legislature. And I thought, if you're ever going to accomplish anything in the legislature, you need to get into the party that's in power. So I ran a campaign just like what I learned at Boys Ranch through the FFA. You get out and you work it. I knocked on, I don't know how many doors, I went to every town in that district. This district, keep in mind, was bigger than every state in the nation but 7 states. That's how many square miles it was. And it was brutal, but as long as I had gas money and I worked it all day, just like I did it when I was state FFA president. State FFA president, you give speeches all day long and you travel the entire state. Well, I worked that race that way, and started out where people didn't know my name, and I eventually won the primary, and then I won the general election. And when I went to Austin, in the Texas Senate, you only have 31 senators. A Senate district is bigger than a congressional district. It's probably one of the strongest bodies of government in the United States, because you only have 31 members that deal with a population the size of Texas. All of them but 3 were attorneys, and I was an ag teacher. I was the only one in the Texas Senate that actually taught in a public school room. And I'll never forget it. I went to this reception, and some of these members came up to me. They were trying to get to know me, and I was trying to get to know them. And they said, well, what are you going to work on? I said, my goal is to establish alcohol and drug treatment centers in Texas. Oh, that sounds good. You'll get a lot of press on that, but it never passed, because the alcohol lobby and the beer lobby is too strong in Austin, and it never happened. Well, that might be what they thought, but that isn't what I thought. So I worked it, and I dealt with I became chairman of the agriculture committee as a freshman in the Texas Senate. And politics was all new to me at this time. And here as a new member, you become chairman of the ag committee. But I served 8 years there and had some good staff, good people helping me. And you know, my last year, we passed some legislation. I first carried the DWI bill, and in that bill, on a third offense, it required mandatory time for treatment, mandatory treatment. Well, there were no treatment centers. So in the next session, we created a new state agency that set up alcohol and drug treatment centers all across the state. And Texas now has done very well in dealing with that problem. I then ran for the U.S. Congress, and that seat opened up. I ran and I got elected, and was elected president of my freshman class. Most of the members in my class are now chairmen of major committees in the U.S. Congress today, or they're members of the U.S. Senate. Well, it's interesting how the good Lord uses you. When I came to Washington, again, I was wondering, what am I going to work on? What issues should I address? What problems should I try to solve? how can I make life a little better? How can I contribute something in the time that I'm here? And this guy walks in my office. I was in office probably 3 or 4 days, and it was about 9 o'clock at night. And I'm still unloading boxes. And this guy walks in my office, and he was a music teacher in Lithuania. His name was Dr. Landsbergis. And it was his first time to Washington. And he saw the roster of members and saw my name and came to my office. And so he started telling me about my uncle, who was a famous composer of music. And he said he's known throughout Lithuania. He has a tremendous talent. And he started telling me more about my family. Well, he knew more about my family than I did, because when my dad left it when I was 10, I didn't know much about my roots. And we became pretty good friends. And I asked him, I said, well, what are you doing here in Washington? And he said his goal was he was head of a new political party called the Suicidal Party. And his goal was to put the Suicidal Party on the ballot against the Communist Party. Well, at that time, the Communist Party, the best way to compare it is to compare it to China today. They had no religion. The government told you what occupation you would do. The government told you how much money you were going to make. The government told you where you're going to live. You had no freedom at all. You were at the hands of a dictator, which in this case was a Communist Party. So I offered to help him with his goal to get on the ballot. And here again, I'm a new member. I'm very naive. I think, oh, this may not be. It was difficult because you're going against the Soviet Union, going against the Russian Empire. Well, I started getting members of Congress to sign letters for me, and passed several resolutions through the House and the Senate, and began to put pressure on them. And so finally, what the Soviets did, they stacked the election. For every Sovietist candidate, they put about 30 communist candidates. And George Bush was a president then, and he asked me and 3 other members of Congress to go over there and observe those elections. So we flew into Berlin, and the Soviets took our passports away, our visas, and wouldn't allow us to leave the hotel that we were in. So we held a press conference in the hotel of that, in the foyer of that hotel, and it was broadcast all over the world. It hit the evening news everywhere, how the Soviets had denied these 4 members of the U.S. Congress the opportunity to make sure these elections were being held honestly. Well, the Suicidal Party won. And the next day, they let us come in to Lithuania. And my friend, Dr. Landsbergis, they let us come in for 16 hours. My friend, Dr. Landsbergis, was elected their first president. And, oh, I wish you could have seen what I saw. People were they were all out in the streets. They were celebrating. They were so happy that now they had freedom. Now they had freedom. And we got in a school bus with the new leaders, the 4 members of Congress, and we drove in that school bus to the next town. And in the back of that school bus, we were helping them write their Declaration of Independence. How they would choose a speaker, how they would, how to help set up their new government. Because this was, I kind of think maybe they didn't think that they would eventually win, but they did. And we went and got a Catholic cardinal out of prison who had been in prison for 30 years. And we brought him back into Vilnius, which is a capital city. And there was this old Catholic cathedral that the Soviets had painted it green and turned it into a museum for the Communist Party. And when we entered town, there were thousands of people. In that bus, we were creeping through the crowd, and we finally got up close to the church, and we got out, and everybody they were crying. And we went into the church, Of course, it was packed. And this Catholic cardinal he was crying. I can't explain what I witnessed. I wish there was some way you could have seen what I saw, because they had Mass for the first time in over 55 years. And they were able to worship their God publicly for the first time in 55 years. And it was extremely moving. Well, the Soviets, there's no way to describe what I witnessed in that church. But we came back to Washington, and President Bush had us go straight to the White House, to the Oval Office. He wanted to know everything that was happening. The Soviets were taking their tanks away from Afghanistan and taking them towards Lithuania. And they came into Lithuania and they surrounded the Parliament building, and the people built a little wall around the park. It's kind of like, felt like I was at the Alamo. And all these tanks surrounding it. And we told President Bush he said, well, what should we do to help these people? And I told him, I said, the number one thing they don't want weapons. They don't want any military support. They're not asking for hospitals. All they want is recognition. They want the United States to recognize Lithuania as a free and independent nation, as one that broke away from the Soviet Union, the first one. And he told me at the time, he said, I can't do it. He didn't want to upset Gorbachev. Well, anyway, over the next probably 12 months, we built coalitions in Congress. We got several other members to go over there. We kind of snuck in through the walls, and Estonia and Latvia broke away, and then Georgia and Ukraine, and eventually led to the fall of the Communist Party. And because of those efforts, the country made me their Grand Duke, and that's how I got that award. But I did publish a book, and it's called, you'll understand it now, it's called The Grand Duke from Boys Ranch. So now you know the story. There's a whole lot more to the story than just that. But I do know that none of this would have happened if it hadn't been for the faith that I gained at Boys Ranch. And I believed, I turned my life entirely over to God. I said, here I am, send me. Take me, use me. And there was a kid who couldn't even stand up and say his name. And I witnessed history. I witnessed the world change and was able to play a small part in that. And I've been blessed way beyond my means. That's my story, but you got to look at what is your story. What do you believe in? What do you want to become? What do you want to contribute to this world to make it a better place? So that your children and your grandchildren will want to know more about you and what you did with your life. We only go through this world one time. And what you do with it depends entirely on you, on yourself. And I happen to be one of those that live by faith very strongly. And as I said, I don't worry about tomorrow. I know who holds tomorrow. And it's worked for me ever since I was that 13-year-old kid who couldn't read. But you got to look at yourself. You got to dig deep. What do you think you want to do? What do you want to do to make yourself happy? What career do you want to get into? What do you want to make of you start out with a dream, and then you try to make that dream come true. And all the resources, we're so blessed to live in a country like this, where we do have the freedom to become whatever we want to become. There's nothing holding us back. Nothing. Well, that's what the story is. James, I probably went a little too long. I'm sorry.
No, sir. Actually, I got a question from one of our members as you were talking, that I think to the part where you were telling them how you first ran for Texas Senate and how it was because of your desire to create alcohol rehabilitation centers in Texas. They want to know, how can I find my purpose in life? Where do I find my purpose? I want to do something. I want to do something greater than just being. How do I find that purpose? You latched on to yours and it propelled you to see great things. How can our audience find their purpose?
Well, that's a good question. And that's kind of what I was emphasizing. You've got to dig deep. You've got to think to yourself, what do I want to be doing 5 years from now? What do I want to be doing 10 years from now? 15 years from now? What do I want to become? Do I want to become a pilot? Do I want to teach school? Do I want to, you have to just look upon yourself as there's nothing better than making a living at doing something that you enjoy doing. That's happiness. Now, we can't all do that, but you can be happy at what you do. And, I'm a big fan of Forrest Gump. There's so many good sayings in that movie, but life is what you make it. It's what you make it. If you choose to be unhappy and bitter at people or complaining about things, that's your choice. That's fine. There's a lot of those people around. But if you choose to try to make a difference in your church, in your school, and trust me, there are thousands of great stories out there of people who started with nothing and became something. There's thousands of them, and you're no different than they are. But the way you start, you've got to look inside yourself and see, well, what do I want to do with myself? And then once you figure out what you want to do with yourself, then you start looking at, well, how do I get there? What do I have to do? Do I have to go to school more? It depends on what your goal is. It's your dream. You start out making a dream first, and then you figure out how you can make that dream come true.
Is there any questions from our group before I go through some of the questions I have? Anyone want to chime in with a question? Or Aaron, do you have a question that you would like to ask as well? Any questions from the group? I'll look through.
Somebody there with a hat waving.
Caden, go ahead.
Yes, sir. So, quick question. So, it's your time of, politics and just everything you go through. How do you keep yourself motivated? Keep everything that people say against you out of your head and out of your personal life?
Well, that's a good question, because in my situation, when I decided to run for the Texas Senate, people thought I was crazy. How do you convince those people that I'm not crazy? This is truly something I want to do. And I did not make it an issue that I wanted to establish alcohol and drug treatments. That was not the basis of my campaign. That was the goal of serving as a senator, if I could get there. But, I just happened to be, and throughout my life, many times I was told, you're not going to make it. You're not going to graduate from high school. You won't catch up with your brother. It's, and of course, growing up in an environment at Boys Ranch at that time, it was not an easy place to live. Nearly half the kids out there had committed violent crimes. Mm. So you were in an environment where it was tough. And many times kids would say, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do this. Well, you're going to have a lot of people telling you you're not going to do it, but that doesn't mean that you have to believe that way. You have to have confidence in yourself and confidence in your dream that you're not going to let anything get in the way. You just keep pursuing. It's persistence and believing in yourself. Of course, in my case, I had a strong belief in my faith and I prayed about it, and it was kind of like, okay, God, we're doing this together. Here we go. You know, and there are a lot of people who start a dream and get knocked down so many times that they think they're never going to accomplish it, and then they do. You just got to keep trying.
Anyone else in here? Go ahead, Caroline.
Hi. Did you ever doubt yourself during your run for Congress?
Yes. I mean, my run for Congress was a tough one because I was a Democrat at that time, and it was a Republican-held seat. So I learned pretty quickly that there's a huge difference in legislative government and federal government and how partisan politics works. When I was a state senator, as I mentioned to you, we had, I think all of them but 3 at the time I got elected were Democrats. So we only had 3 Republicans out of the 31 senators. We eventually picked up a few more. But we had Republicans who were chairmen of committees, even though the Democrats were in power. We didn't let partisan politics bother us back then. But then when I went to Washington and running in that campaign, I began to learn how it's a lot different on the federal level. There's a lot of bitterness between both parties. There's a lot more division, and it's a lot harder to get things accomplished. And I ran into that in that campaign. I was outspent in my run to Congress almost 2-1, but I wasn't outworked, and I won. And I carried almost every county. I can't remember. I think we had 32 counties in that district. It went, I don't know if any of you from Texas, but it went from Dallas all the way up north to Wichita Falls and went west to New Mexico. It was brutal. But, yeah, to answer your question, it doesn't make any difference. I'd made up my mind I was going to run. I was going to give it. I always kind of told myself, I don't want to be an old man sitting on a swing wondering, as I look back on my life, wondering, well, what if? I didn't want to have any what ifs. At least try. I mean, what's wrong with trying? And when you try, you give it your all. So that when you look back, it doesn't make any difference. I gave it everything I had. If I won, fine. If I didn't win, I had no doubts. I went down every road. I did everything it took. I ran the best race I could run.
You had a good staff too. I think you should acknowledge your staff, because I think you had a really good staff.
That's a good point, Aaron. But you have to remember, I didn't have a staff till I won. Now, you helped me get elected. I mean, you were out there working the pavement, but Aaron's a little bit different because we have a very close relationship. He's more than just a staffer or a friend. We came from the same place, and we think the same way, and we're a lot alike.
Any other questions from the group or comments? Yes, Chloe.
So I know you talked about how your faith was kind of what led you on this journey. So I was wondering, during your time in government and politics, how did you balance your relationship with Christ while also still fulfilling all the duties you had to do for your work?
That's a good question. And this is something a lot of people don't know about, but there's a very strong religious base in Congress. We have what's known as a Congressional prayer breakfast. And that prayer breakfast was started back during the time of World War II, when there were some senators in the Oval Office, and they had gotten a report that things were not looking good overseas, that we had a lot of troops, or We had a battle where we lost a bunch of young men and women fighting for our country. And one of the senators, of course, the president was there, and one of the senators said, well, it looks like the only thing we can do now is pray. And so the president, which was Harry Truman, said, well, then let's pray. And they got down on their knees in the Oval Office, and they prayed for God to help them in this war. Well, the senators came back to the Senate, and they decided, we ought to do this every week. Let's get a bunch of senators together, and let's have a breakfast, and let's have a prayer breakfast. So they did. And then the House followed after that. The House created a prayer breakfast. And then between the two of them, they decided, well, we ought to have a national prayer breakfast. So that's how the national prayer breakfast got started, was through members of the House and the Senate. And we still do today. And the prayer breakfast started, I guess it started when Dwight Eisenhower was president. You've heard of the Hilton hotels? Well, the Hilton, there was a gentleman that was in that meeting in the White House, his name was Hilton. And he was the guy who started Hilton Hotels. And as this idea of a national prayer breakfast began to grow, he said, I'll build a hotel in Washington, D.C., specifically for the national prayer breakfast. And we can bring in government leaders all around the world, not just in the U.S., but all around the world, elected officials, anybody that has strength within their government, bring them into D.C., bring everybody we can that are government leaders, and let's have a national prayer breakfast. So he built that hotel with the full intention of having a hotel to meet the demands of the national prayer breakfast. And still today, that's the biggest ballroom in Washington, D.C., where they hold, the breakfast has gotten so big that they now do satellites of it, and leaders from all around the world come to it. And it lasts for about 3 days. But it's amazing when you see how not only do we pray at our Congressional prayer breakfast, but we pray as a globe, as a planet. And as former members, we continue to be involved with these other countries and encouraging prayer there. And when you go to a prayer breakfast, it's not open to the public. It's not open to family members. It's only members and former members. But when you go there, there is no politics. You don't know who's a Democrat, who's a Republican. You don't know anything. And it has nothing to do with politics. But members get to understand each other a little closer by knowing that we all have one thing in common, and that we all have faith and we believe in Jesus Christ. So, but still beyond, most people have this image that Congress is, they don't do that much. There is not that much faith, but there is. We have prayer at every session before we start it. And we still today, and despite the fact that many people have tried to encourage Congress to remove it, right above the podium in the U.S. House, it says, "In God we trust." And, there've been a lot of people who think they should remove that. They won't remove it because this country was built on a strong belief in God.
We have a question from one of our viewers that was sent to me. It says, what do you wish the younger generations would change in the American political climate?
That's a great question. And trust me, there's a lot of room for improvement. A lot of room. And I think if there was one thing, if you could change that would make this country better, is to have a House and a Senate that could work together, and to have political parties that could work together. They put partisan politics aside. Now, it's interesting, during the coronavirus, you heard all this bitterness about the House and Senate. Look how long it took them to pass legislation. There was $3 trillion. How long did it take them to pass? They did it like that. because they got together for a common cause and a common purpose, and they did it. There wasn't any partisan politics in that legend. They did it. Why can't we do that all the time? And I think that young people that want to get into politics, start watching it. Watch C-SPAN. You know, some states that broadcast their legislature, watch some of that. Get involved in it yourself. Read articles, read stories, find areas that you're interested in. And I wouldn't say become an expert, become close to an expert. When you're serving in the House, in U.S. House, what I found, you can't keep track of all the legislation. It's impossible. You have a staff that helps you. But even at that, you can't keep track of it all. But you do have members within the House that are experts in healthcare, in military, in agriculture, in energy. I mean, all these different areas. And you rely on those members to help advise you on what's best.
That was from Brittany. Anyone else have a question or any comments they want to make?
James, this is Jennifer.
I was so hoping you were going to say something.
Senator, you were the keynote speaker at the Arkansas State FFA Convention in 1987. And I was the first female state president in Arkansas. And I just want to say thank you for sharing your story. You know, I didn't grow up in a children's home, but I did grow up in, you know, a single parent home and food stamps and just a very unstable upbringing. And, you know, even as state president, I wondered how in the world that I had got to where that I was, you know, and then just getting to meet you and hearing your story, you just remind me again and again that really it doesn't matter where we come from. You know, it just matters where we want to go and how we intend to let God use our gifts. And you've done that well. And I just thank you. Thank you for sharing your story back then and for sharing your story again today. So.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. And you make a good point. You know, you can't hang on what happened yesterday. You always got to be looking toward, well, what am I going to do next? And you know, you can't just sit around, do nothing. There's too many opportunities that are out there. But thank you, Jennifer. I do remember going to Arkansas. Yeah, I was very fortunate being able to speak at some of these state conventions over the years.
For a history lesson for those of you who are involved with FFA, and the majority of the FFA members that are on here today are female, you owe the congressman a little bit. Aaron, you want to open that door and share a little bit and let him expand upon that point?
Yeah, that's a great segue. Depending on who you listen to, there will be a debate as to who made the motion to allow girls in the FFA. But the facts will remain the same, and that is that somebody had to have the leadership to negotiate, to collaborate, and put together an opportunity for that vote to take place. And with that, I will tell you, the man that did that is Bill Sarpalius. So, Bill, you might want to share that, because I think it's one of those neat behind-the-scenes stories that most people don't know. They hear about the vote on the delegate floor, but it's what you did behind the scenes that was most significant to the vote of allowing girls in the FFA.
There was, and this is an interesting story, there was another issue at that national convention. And back then, every state only had 2 delegates. And so the larger states like Texas and California and Florida and Iowa and all these other states that were larger in membership in the FFA, but yet they had the same votes as Rhode Island or any of these other smaller states. And you take like Texas at that time, our membership into the FFA, I think we were like up 28% of the entire membership in the nation came from Texas. California was close to that, and Florida, and some of these other states. So for years, they've been trying to pass what they call reapportionment. Could never do it because you've got 100 members there, and who wants to give up their, who wants to dilute their vote? And so for years, they've been trying that. And what we did in Texas, our two members that came, we would have the outgoing state president and the incoming state president. Well, my first convention I went to, I was the incoming state president. I learned a little bit more about that issue. And we took a stab at it, and they do it every convention, every national convention, they tried to change that. So in my second convention, I got all those bigger states together in a room and said, we have an opportunity here to pass this. And let's tie this to allowing girls in the FFA. And if you do that together, then you give every state the opportunity to increase their membership. This is the time to do that. You give every state the chance to allow girls and promote it and try to grow the membership in the national FFA. So that's what we did. And at that convention, by tying those two issues together, they both passed. And that convention was a significant step forward in the FFA, because if you go to a national convention today, you see a whole floor full of delegates. But back when I was there, we only had 100 delegates. There wasn't as much involvement per state. But by tying them together, and you see females all throughout that convention, they made a huge impact from a positive standpoint in the FFA.
Anyone else have anything before we close?
I would like to encourage, if y'all haven't, if you want to read my book, you can get it on Amazon and hit the bestseller list, and I promise you will enjoy it. There's a whole lot of others. This picture here was taken the day I came to Boys Ranch, and I'm tall and skinny. I was 13 years old, and in that picture, my younger brother was ahead of me. Of course, the other picture was when I was state FFA president. So that shows Boys Ranch and the FFA and what an impact it had in my life.
We'll have a link for that will be on the YouTube channel. That'll be in the description of his video when that goes up at the middle of next week. Aaron, you had something?
Oh, I was just going to say that I know especially college students and students that are seniors. You got any seniors on here by chance? Oh, Faith, you got some that are on here. You get senioritis, you don't want something else to read. But I can tell you this. Bill's book, the book is put together very well. It was done down at Texas A&M University, so they don't use a lot of big words, and there's a lot of pictures, and they've done everything they can to make it a very easy read. But in all truthfulness, I can say this. I have to read all the time. I'm always trying to keep up with stuff. I'm sharing personally. I like a good read. I like a read that I can start and it just kind of flows and it's easy to follow and you get it. I will tell you that everybody that I have spoken to that has picked up that book will tell you once you start reading it, you don't want to quit. It's like the story is so engaging that you just want to keep going. And so I share that because I don't want somebody to be intimidated by saying, well, I got to get this book and it's going to be a hard read. It's a great read. It's an easy read. And I encourage it. I mean, I could probably throw some things out here, Bill, I guess what I would ask you to share with this group is if knowing what you know now, and you gave us a whole lot. I mean, you gave us a lot a while ago, but knowing what you know now, if you could hone in on 2 or 3 tips, if you were these young people and you were looking at being successful in life, what would some of those be as you see it in the world and the changes that you're witnessing from Washington, D.C., what would you tell them?
I guess to make it short and sweet, have faith, believe in your maker, believe in God, believe that this planet came from him, and all the things that we enjoy. I tell people, you know, I can't wait to see paradise because I'm already living in it. I mean, it's a beautiful planet. And the second thing is believe in yourself. God created you. He put you here. You know, what are you going to do with it? Believe in yourself. Believe in him and believe in yourself. And the third thing is believe in the opportunities that are out there. You live in a free country. You take it for granted. You don't realize that most of the world, they don't have the opportunities you have. You can dream any dream you want in this country, and you can make it come true. So believe in God, believe in yourself, and believe in the opportunities that you have here, and then go make your dream come true.
Thank you so much, Congressman, for your time. I want to thank you for being willing to share your story with our audience. We have a lot of new members who joined us live today on our Zoom call, and a lot of you that are first-time viewers on Facebook as well. We appreciate you coming on this live as well. So thank you. Thank you for this. All of us, everybody do a gallery view here of thanking him. So everybody did a little gallery shake there. Except for Hunter, who's driving. We don't want you to wreck, so don't do that. Oh, there you did one. Okay, you almost wrecked. Thanks, guys. That ends this week's Generation Ziegler community call. We'll have up by Sunday night, Monday, who the guest speaker will be next week, and we'll invite you to go forward as we expand what we're doing here and what we're offering. As I mentioned before, all of the last 3 calls, plus this one, will be on our Facebook, will be on our YouTube channel, GenerationZVideos.com. If you go there, you can find it. And at the end of next week, we'll have short clips, brief clips from each one. So a question that, like the question Caroline will ask, might be answered just as a clip on its own. So you can have 2 to 4 or 5 minute segments of it in case you didn't want to see an hour worth of the call. You'll be able to see it in pieces as well. And we'll have those up as well coming up next week. So thank you, guys, and I appreciate it. Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, guys.